EDC folks will get us started in a bit, but we're going to just let folks trickle in and get settled, and then we'll get started. So, and thank you for making the scheduling work. It's obviously a challenge with the task force leadership and all the participants, but excited to be having the conversation.
We'll give folks another minute and then we'll jump in. And thank you for everybody for being prompt on a Monday morning. So I want to respect that and start relatively on time since we've just got an hour.
Victoria, I don't know if you're speaking, but you're muted.
I'm talking to my dog that's sitting next to me.
Aw. Okay.
Sorry. Yeah, I see you see my lips going. I'm multitasking.
Fair.
Here, where's the, how do I unblur the camera? Wally, say hi, Wally. Say hi.
Oh, there we go.
There you go.
So sweet.
He's very excited about this meeting.
Yeah, we can tell.
Well, with that, why don't I start since I want to be respectful of your time. If somebody, Betsy, would you mind pulling up the deck? And I can, while you do that, I can start. So we have an hour today. The intention is this is an opportunity for the task force to speak directly to the advisory groups and for us, the project team, to answer questions that you have, but also to listen and to hear. So we have an hour, which, next slide, please. We'll divide into two parts. The first is just to talk about what we've heard to date and what our port planning work has found so that we're all on the same page about what Moffitt and Nichol has found in their work. And then 45 minutes for Q&A and discussion between the advisory groups and the task force. So next slide, please. So what we've heard, this is a summary of what was at the advisory group number 2, which was the site planning tool scenario. I think just the last bullet on the first section, I think, is the key that you guys at that meeting, it was clear that the advisory group did not support housing development and didn't want to go into using the tool. So there was a discussion about financials, and we talked a lot about that, but didn't get to the point of using the tool. So I wanted to say that up front. One thing that also came up clearly was the thinking about the port within the region and within the Port Authority's property and as a part of a regional network. But also that our focus on housing and commercial uses to cover the costs, which, as a reminder, are over $1 billion, was not appropriate. And we should look at alternative opportunities, be that bonds or private investment, or the assumption around the finances was flawed. That was something that came through in the advisory group, as well as the questioning whether it is a standard practice and a standard model for ports to be profitable and operate without a subsidy. That was questioned throughout, and something that we've had Moffitt and Nichol talk about with the task force. We talked a while about micromobility and blue highways, something that we believe strongly in as a way to reduce truck traffic, and that this place at BMT could be a key node within the blue highway network. And then resiliency and being able to protect against sea level rise and climate change and integrate into the Red Hook Coastal Resiliency Project. So those were what we heard. I want to just take 1 second and pause here and just to ask a question to the advisory group members. Did we get this right? Is this what you recollect from our conversation during the site planning tool? Okay, we're going to share all these slides afterwards. So if there are additions or anything from your notes that we did not appropriately capture, we're happy to change this and happy to go into any other level of detail. So next slide, please. So Moffitt and Nickel is the port planning expert that we've been working with, and this is what we've shown to the task force as the key takeaways. That the potential at BMT is not limited by space, that there is enough space to handle projected throughput. It's really physical constraints. The finger piers today do not meet the industry standard. We do not have rail access or direct access to a truck, to a interstate highway system, and that the infrastructure is and equipment are obsolete, and that there is regional competition that we have to compete with. Those are the limiters to our work and to the port. But there is an opportunity for it to remain as a niche container terminal for cargo that's destined within the market. There are smaller ships that are being pushed out of the ports, focus on larger TEU vessels, ones that are serving trade routes within the Caribbean, within South America, that we could be able to capture. And that would be able to augment the two services that are there today. And so with investment in equipment, with a new marginal pier, and with a new standard, with industry standard lease term of roughly 30 years, you would be able to push that throughput from 90,000, which it is today, up to 135,000, and maybe even higher as a way to address then that would be a way to address the financial viability. With that, that Moffitt Nickel believes that there would be a financially self-sustaining port at this location. They have looked at what the size would be, and what we've found is that roughly 60 acres would provide enough space to handle up to 170,000 container moves, while still providing space for flexible uses, what we call flex maritime uses, as well as construction staging and blue highway. You would do that in that space through densified operations and new equipment. So next slide, please. We talked about the regional network. That was a question that came up. This is a graphic that we've shown to the task force, and it gives a sense of the scale of the competition within the region. The New York, New Jersey region is clearly the largest gateway to the East Coast, but our direct competition is along the eastern seaboard at the Philadelphia and Wilmington. They're comparably smaller gateways, and they specialize in South American and Caribbean and Central America trade routes, as well as there's been significant investment in infrastructure related to cold storage in Philadelphia. Grimaldi and Seaboard, which currently service the port, stop at Wilmington and stop at Philadelphia. So there's an opportunity to build off of that and capture another service from those locations. Next slide, please. So this graphic illustrates what I just talked about, which is the growth in container moves from 90,000, which is today, through the two services, to 135,000 in the middle of the bar chart there. That shows the third regular service. Those, again, would be smaller vessels, 4,000 or less TEUs, that today are being pushed out of New York and New Jersey as they're focusing on European and Asian routes, that are boats that are larger, 5, 10, 15,000 TEUs. There is an opportunity for additional, like the wharf face is large enough to be able to then, and the upland areas, to handle the growth up to 170,000 TEUs. But Moffitt and Nickel is very confident that, and what they described to the task force is, if they were making to a private client, they would be very confident in a recommendation of getting to 135,000 TEUs and up to 170,000 TEUs, should the activity exceed expectation. So that's enough. Within the 60 acres, we believe that they could handle that, as well as get to 170,000 TEUs, as well as the additional activities I described earlier. So next slide, please. In addition to looking at and relying on the conversations we've had with Moffitt and Nichol. We've talked with Moffitt and Nichol to industry stakeholders, to some of the largest port operators in the United States. We've talked to investment companies, and they corroborate what we have found. What we believe is that there's still an opportunity here for a niche role servicing perishables, maybe servicing construction, staging, and doing that in an economically viable way. The key is really making sure that this is a port that meets modern standards. So replacing the finger piers with a marginal pier, investing in cold storage, investing in new infrastructure and equipment, and then providing a lease term that matches the industry standard. The container terminal today is operating on a 5-year lease terms, which is a significant barrier to investment. So with a new lease term and with investment into modern infrastructure, you could have a financially viable port here. People are particularly excited about the opportunity for blue highways. We know that this is something that's an emergent, nascent industry, but there is real excitement for that. Certainly, it'll be challenging to have the shift from barges to trucks, but we heard just last week when I think Mike Stamatis put it very eloquently about the opportunity to be able to use the Blue Highway system to get trucks off of streets. And that's a real goal for us, and one that the industry has said has significant potential. Next slide, please. So this is a site plan that we've shared with the task force. This reflects 60 acres. The replacement of piers 8, 9A, and 9B with a new marginal pier that moves out closer to the navigational channel. With that, there's deeper depth there, and so you don't have the dredging cost is less. What you have is at the top really here is what we've said is our goal from the beginning: a modern, sustainable, clean port, one that gets trucks off the road, that continues to be a place for perishables and for getting food off east of the Hudson, and then a key node in the Blue Highway network. This would be, importantly, there's enough space here for the 135,000, as well as container growth up to 170,000, space for bulk cargo, construction staging, and also Blue Highway. So the marginal pier length here shows 1,687 feet. That linear footage would be able to accommodate a container vessel and a barge at the same time, which is really important that we've heard from both the current tenants and then from other tenants that we've interviewed. Densification and port capacity is certainly something that are intertwined. And we've been able to, from Moffitt and Nichol, and from looking at case studies, seeing that you could go higher with the stacking and get to the 135,000 TEUs. And that allows for an efficient use of the space within the 60 acres. Next slide, please. So the Blue Highway system, this is an illustrative graphic showing the connection between the Brooklyn Marine Terminal and Hunts Point. Hunts Point is the largest food distribution center on the East Coast in the United States, and there's a real opportunity between the focus on perishables and blue highways. So having something that is a container that's unloaded at the Brooklyn Marine Terminal is then barged up to Hunts Point. So that provides both a direct connection to reduce the number of trucks on the street, but also I think the economics of this project makes sense with having one operator who operates our port as well as operating the Hunts Point landing. Is a real opportunity to change the economics of that move. But also it provides an opportunity for bolstering micro distribution, using our blue highways to bring goods to places in Manhattan, Queens, and then having them distributed by what we call micro freight or micro mobility. So this is a really important step to do that. Next slide, please. One of the things that came up in our last advisory group meeting was around the financial assumption of who pays for what and who is responsible for what. What is happening today is there's an ongoing $3 to $5 million subsidy that fluctuates based on a number of factors. That is not the standard in the industry that we've heard from Moffitt and Nichol. The standard is that a landlord would be responsible for pier infrastructure, dredging costs. An operator will pay for topside equipment, but they'll do that without an ongoing subsidy. They'll pay a rent to the landlord. What necessitates that is obviously the split of what's at the top, the split of the infrastructure investment, but then on a longer term lease. So we're taking that as a given is that we're going to operate with this model, and we think that there's really a model that where there's no longer a subsidy to the future container terminal operator. What we've found is that the port, like to get to that modern standard, you're looking at over $1 billion worth of investment that's necessary to make that happen. And that's investment ranging from extending the marginal pier, replacing the piers themselves, investing in Pier 10. Pier 10 today doesn't have the fendering that's necessary to protect the boats. So all of that adds up to over $1 billion investment. Next slide, please. And this touches on the way that we're thinking about resiliency. Today, Red Hook Coastal Resiliency Project is going to be in place. That project is moving forward, but it ends at the Hamilton Avenue gate, and there isn't the connection beyond that to protect the upland neighborhoods. So we're thinking about resilient and sustainable infrastructure that includes coastal protection, includes stormwater drainage to address any issues related to rain events, and then making sure that we have a clean port, that it's electrified, and that as much of the equipment as possible is clean and electric. So given time, I'm not going to go too much into detail on this, but just that we're thinking very holistically from basically the bulkhead edge up to the upland area about including in the operations about how we make the site resilient, and then also how we make sure that it's clean as much as possible. Next slide, please. So that's what I have. I want to give time for any task force member to ask any questions or advisory group members to ask any questions, but we want to make sure that this is an opportunity for all of you to talk amongst yourselves while we're here to answer questions and take notes. Thank you.
Hi, Nate. Thanks for that. I don't want to speak for the group here at all, but I'm just wondering if you can just help me understand the involvement that the current team, Mike Stamatis and those guys have had on what you've just presented as far as the use of the port and the containers and all that.
Sure. It's good to see you, Pete. I hope you're doing well. So we have the port tenants are part of the advisory groups. We have met with them. I think we had our third meeting last week. So there was an initial meeting in the fall. They were part of the site planning tool. And then we had a meeting with them in the task force last week. In addition to that, we've done interviews with them, site visits with them. Moffett and Nickel has toured the site with them and included also interviewed them. And that was one to understand the site itself from their perspective. And then for last week, I thought it was really important for the task force to hear directly from Mike about what his vision is for the site, excuse me, and as well as answer any questions that he had. So I think that we went an hour and a half last week with him and it was a really great opportunity for the task force to hear directly from him.
Got it. Thank you.
Amanda. Yeah, Amanda.
Thanks, Nate. Good to see you this morning. I wasn't going to raise my hand first because I feel like I take up a lot of space in these rooms, but I do appreciate everyone on this call who's here today. I think my question for the members of this advisory group, I think, making this space work for the port operation and the Blue Highway is like the least controversial aspect of this entire plan. It's something everybody wants to see work, and also the thing that is at greatest risk for a lot of people if this doesn't go forward. So I guess my question for this task force is whether you see a world where this, maybe this work could be phased, whether you think that equipment could be modernized, a port operator lease could be longer, a marginal pier, much like the one that was in the original grant proposal, can begin to be worked on, and whether you can make that work for the, for the maritime industry as we maybe take more time on other aspects of the project. Like, is that a reasonable question, or am I sort of missing the economics of it? Is it that unless we've got a full out marginal pier, 60 acres, piers 8A, 9A, 9B built out into the water, there's no way that this can be a workable operation? Or is there a way that it can start smaller and build out over time, kind of giving us the ability to straddle that line and extend the process on the more controversial aspects of the project?
Is that a question to me, Amanda, or it sounded like you wanted to hear from other members of the advisory
It
group?
could also be a question for you, since you've got a lot of this information, but for the people who are, I think a lot of the advisory group members also, like, obviously are also very invested in the port operations and the waterfront operations, and want to see that continue, and also but also have some issues with other aspects of the plan. So I'm just wondering if that is something that is workable or possible from their perspective or from your perspective.
This is Courtney from Waterfront Lines. I don't have an answer to that question. I feel like the local members and community-based members of the advisory group should answer that most likely. But my question is partly similar to that, which is that it's $1 billion of investment, but when does that have to take place? Does it have to be $1 billion immediately with a sale of real estate occurring in the next 18 months? Or is there a way to finance that $1 billion investment with bonds or with commitments from the industry or with an estimate of increased tax revenues or savings, all kinds of things? Is there a way to calculate, for the long term with blue highways, the reduction in carbon emissions and have that count into somehow the city's and the state's goals for emissions reductions and greenhouse gas reduction? So I think that's part of the question and maybe part of this answer as well. If this is the core portion of this planning study or this master plan study, the maritime operations, it seems like this is where to start. And then all the other questions about how to develop the site come from this, and the $1 billion financing that's needed is integrated into all of that. But I'm wondering about that, just generally with what the city is thinking about with the $1 billion.
Sure. I think I'll have to take back the question about the long-term financing and how that's going to work, because what I can answer is the Moffitt and Nickel analysis assumes that within a period of 5 years, the investments take place, and then after that, there's a new operator that would come on and then would be able to have, with a new lease term, with that new investment, be able to run a financially viable port without city subsidy. That was something I think Dan Solomon was on. Dan Solomon is a member of the Moffitt and Nickel team who was on the site planning tool when we did that a couple months ago. That's the assumption. We talked in that period, we talked about like a 30-year period of payback for the investment, but the assumption and the analysis is that the investments are made within a 5-year period. And then after that, there's a new operator and a new financially viable model.
Why is that the case instead of a 35-year window for investment?
So there's well, we want to make the investments, like the core of this is making, so why do why build the 60-acre port why do those investments within 5 years rather than phasing them over 35 years? Is that what you're asking?
Right.
Well, we want to make sure that it meets an industry standard. We want to make sure that there's the best product available for a future operator. finger piers are not what we've heard that services want. And that to be able to have a pier and piers that match those standards with new clean and electric infrastructure is crucial. So it's a combination of the changing the agreement between the city and the future operator, going from the 5 years to a longer term for the lease, and then providing a product that the industry, product being like making sure that we have a marginal wharf that's large enough to be able to handle a container vessel, that has the infrastructure to then service the vessel while servicing a barge, so that we can support the Blue Highway network and do that as soon as possible. So phasing the construction over a 35-year period, we don't think would be able to respond to that. But we certainly, like the question, Courtney, about like the financing and how long, like the payback period on that, I would have to talk to my real estate, the folks on the real estate team that were closer to talking about, closer to that analysis to get you about the payback period. But the investment and making sure that the investments are happening as soon as possible is really key, because frankly, when we got this from the Port Authority, it was in worse condition than we thought. And so it's going the way that 9A and 9B are, which is going towards obsolescence and not being able to use those finger piers. So we need to do those right away because there's problems today.
Well, I'm pretty sure that retrofitting or fixing those finger piers is not the totality of the $1 billion investment.
It's not.
So, right. So the rush, there's a rush for those piers, but I'm not clear on what the rest of the rush is, and especially if there's a way to finance in different ways. Typically, I don't think there's a rush, especially for a long-term investment in something that will pay off way beyond the next 35 years. And so I'm just wondering if there's another motivation for the speed at which that investment needs to be realized.
Karen.
Hi, good morning.
Good morning.
So while I'm not against development by any means, I am extremely still concerned about housing in that particular site, only because of the dynamics across the country right now. We have tariffs going on building materials. And like, for me, there's two different things happening. Number one, I feel kind of cheated that the city, state, whoever, let the piers get that bad before they said anything. And now it's kind of being shoved down our throats that we need to fix them. What would happen if we didn't fix them? Where is the tax dollars that are supposed to support that? And I agree that we should probably look towards staging this a little better, only because like the rest of the industry knows that building materials are going up right now. Most people are not building right now because of the situation with tariffs, with the government, doing a lot of adjustments and things like that. I'm just concerned that the price might balloon way past what we're talking about today by the time the work gets done. And I'm sick of that, like that's a big area. It can hold a lot of material. I'm not understanding if we really are thinking like that, why we aren't utilizing that as an industrial space. Thank you. I yield.
Amy, I believe you had your hand up next.
Sorry, I always look to the lower left for the microphone. I was wondering why there's acceptance of this deal by EDC with the Port Authority, because we've heard numerous times that the state of the port was in much worse condition than anyone thought. The price has gone up from 95 million to 1.5 billion. Just trying to just trying to understand why there's not a feeling of going back and renegotiating this, and why we would have to accept 7,000 to 9,000 units of housing to pay for degradation of a port over decades. So that's a big one. The New York Times article mentioned this project in conjunction with the Port Authority bus terminal in Midtown, and that the mayor pledged $2 billion in pilots to that project. They also got a couple hundred, about $15 billion or something from the federal government. So I'm just wondering why this project can't seem to get any funding other than the bank account of apartment units, and also wondering if EDC is putting any money towards this project. We haven't heard to date that the EDC is throwing in $1 million. So wondering what their role is.
Sure, I can take the last part first, and then I'll jump to the first. So the EDC is funding, and the city is funding. When the transfer occurred, there was the announcement of the $80 million. So that's $55 million for repairing Piers 7, 8, and 10. There was then $15 million to fund an electric crane. There was $10 million for this planning study. The city is coming with and working with ONB right now for the local match, the roughly $109 million for the local match from Mega. So we're coming with money. Then the state is coming with $15 million for cold storage. So that's real investment and on the city end, that's larger than has been made in decades. On the first part of, like, I guess fundamentally, why did we do the deal? Having not been part of the negotiation, so I can't speak to the Port
It's
Authority
not why
piece.
you did the deal. I think
Yeah.
it's why you're accepting the deal. I mean, any
Why?
of us,
Okay.
just
Yeah.
to use a simple analogy, if we go to buy
Yeah.
a house
Sure.
and we find out that it needs all kinds of structural work that we were not aware of, we would renegotiate that deal or get out of that deal. And it seems like the EDC and the city and the state have just accepted that the Port Authority left this in really bad condition, worse than anybody ever thought. And you know what? We're just stuck with it, as opposed to, hey, you were derelict on this, and you gave 85 million for Brooklyn Bridge Park. What's your contribution to this, or how are we going to move forward?
Sure. I would say, I would just say, like, what this is, and it gets thrown around a lot, but it does ring true at its core, really a generational opportunity. Like that 120 acres that today is inaccessible to the public, to be able to plan it and be able to do it with the community and do meetings like these were things that were not happening when the Port Authority was running the site. It just was not. And that the Port Authority was giving leases that were not advantageous to the business. The site was falling into the water. And now the city is coming with real money and a commitment to do this work to be able to get to the goals that we think are really crucial. Waterfront investment, infrastructure investment, maintain a financially viable port, and address the real housing crisis in the city. And so those things, like the first direct waterfront access, open space, were not even on the table as considerations when this was under the Port Authorities. So I know, like, we throw around this is an opportunity and a generational one, but at its core, I think it really is true, and was not going to happen when the Port Authority was stewarding the property. So that's why I think that's why I know why we're doing this. But I wasn't part of the negotiation, so I can't speak to anything related to that, but we'll certainly respond to that because we're taking, also for process, we're taking notes on everything that's raised here, and we'll answer those questions back to the advisory group before the next advisory group meeting. Amy, did you just thought?
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Did you have a follow-up to that, Amy? Your hand's still up. No.
I mean, there's
I-
plenty to follow up on them, but I will
Sure.
yield.
Okay, sure. I just want to go to Victoria, who had her hand raised next.
You're on mute, Victoria.
I thought I took myself off, sorry, when I unraised my hand. So I just want to, I had a different question. I want to talk about staging and on the site and the timeline for the staging and the BQE staging. And then, but I want to just respond with what Nate said, which, you know, this, if we are phrasing this and committing all saying this is a generational opportunity, why are we taking a generational opportunity of planning a site of 122 acres in this short of time when every other parcel in the city gets way more than that, no matter if it's GPP or ULURP? So I just think, and doing it with the community, I don't feel like the community feels like they're part of this process at all. If you ask an everyday Red Hooker how they've been engaged and how they feel about doing it with the community if they have a voice in this. So I don't think that's an accurate statement. And then the housing crisis, you know, we have addressed the housing crisis by passing a monumental bill called City of Yes that's going to have huge impacts on the city. And this site alone should not be bearing the burden of the housing crisis across the city. We actually have an affordability crisis. And this property, because of how much I think, and I would love from, so, you know, I want to ask about the staging. And then also I'm interested in what you guys are going to say is going to cost the price per square foot to build, you know, housing on the site, because I think it'll be out of range with what the market will bear when the properties come to market, because even properties in Red Hook are not getting moving and there isn't enough demand for them to move right now. If you guys studied 160 Imlay, if you studied 199 Conover that are languishing on the market, like there isn't enough demand for properties here to meet the amount of housing that you're going to build without having a huge transportation shift. And that I don't think Red Hook has, you know, without changing Red Hook to a different, not a mixed use neighborhood, you're not going to attract the sign of people that want to live here that I think would pay the price that you're going to have to charge for these units. So if we're talking about addressing the housing crisis, this is an appropriate site. And you know, there are sites around this property that would make more sense, but I'm confused on that. I really do want to ask about, my question was about staging, but if Courtney, if you want to continue on the topic that we're on, because we're now responding to what Nate said, I can hold that question to not change the topic.
Sure. Yeah, so this is Courtney from Waterfront Alliance. I just had one primary comment, which is that Nate and in EUC, Waterfront Alliance is a waterfront access organization as well as a maritime advocate, and the whole range of many, many uses on waterfronts, everything from industrial to wetlands preservation. We absolutely do not support direct access to the water from this site, not in any circumstance. It's a shipping channel. Brooklyn Bridge Park, which has some of the premier waterfront access features and amenities in the country, actually, is right next door. So I just want to triple emphasize that direct waterfront access is a very, very bad idea at this site. So Farhana's going to put into the chat the report that we did several months ago in a webinar on industrial public access opportunities that there are. So we really hope that EDC and the task force looks this over and incorporates this type of design and these concepts into any type of public access or public amenity and open space investments for the property. And I think I wanted to say a couple things about the activists or the people who've been following this issue with the Port Authority's lack of investment over time. It was during the pandemic when Waterfront Alliance heard a podcast with Rick Cotton talking about the opportunity to sell Red Hook in order to make up for the deficit that the Port Authority had been projecting through the pandemic because of the decrease of revenue from the airports and bridges and tunnels. And so the lack of investment over time at Brooklyn Marine Terminal was an offshoot of the fact that the Port Authority, it could be seen this way, and actually we're pretty sure it was this way, but could be seen as an opportunity for a way for the Port Authority to not have to make investments and in fact realize some significant revenue from the sale. We did hear then from the Port Authority that they had been inviting and doing tours with different developers on the site in 2000, 21 and 22, including Italian developers who are interested in restaurant and upscale housing and hotel development. And so when we were made aware of that and they told us that directly, then it was clear that this lack of investment was really part of a larger strategy, which ended up in the situation we are now. I think that the Waterfront Alliance's perspective, and this is not the task force's perspective, is that there is a huge opportunity for the city to have control over this site and not the Port Authority. So I'm not so sure if this is, if a result of this part of this discussion is about trying to put the responsibility for Brooklyn Marine Terminal back to the Port Authority. Not sure that's the future. So I think it's really about how we move forward from this point.
I can actually just, sorry, Courtney, I misspoke. When I say direct waterfront access, I'm talking about bringing people to the water, not onto the water. So that was a little bit of, that was sloppy description by me. Victoria, what we've accounted for in the flex maritime space is accounting for the growth in the throughput to the 135,000 container moves, as well as the additional growth plus space available for staging for 2 construction projects. That could be the BQE reconstruction, that could be for the reconstruction on the Manhattan side for the coastal resiliency projects. But there's space to a lot within that. There's enough space within that to account for 2 construction staging projects.
And the timeline for that staging?
I mean, it would be contingent on when those projects begin construction. I don't know off the top of my head when the BQE is intended to begin construction, but.
Is there staging for the repairs also on the site and then for building out the other pieces of the property?
Yes, there would be space. Carly. Oh, sorry, Victoria, did you have another question that you wanted to go through? You had your hand still raised.
If there's not another question, but it looks like Carly has her hand up.
Carly has her hand up. Yeah, I just wanted, your hand was still raised, so I want to make sure.
I just wanted to clarify the point about the Port Authority, Courtney, and just from the task force perspective in terms of what I've heard so far. This is really not about retaining Port Authority authority over the property, but rather making sure that on their way out, the lease that they signed in the 1979 or whatever it is upheld, which requires them to maintain the property. So similar to when they exited the property at Brooklyn Bridge Park and they were forced to pay $85 million in back pay on deferred maintenance, the fact that that did not happen in this deal indicates that the city was not advocating for the city's interest. And so the request here so far has been to ensure that the Port Authority kicks money in as they let go of the property. So I just wanted to clarify the conversation that's been had on that. I think in general, just as we are moving through this hour, I think one of the things, and I'm hearing this across a lot of the AGs, and it's just sort of an overarching insight, is that we continue to not be able to have detailed conversations about resiliency, about governance, about environmental justice, because we're so hung up on the one-legged stool and the lack of forward thinking on the financial modeling here. And so I think we've heard this over and over and over again. I think we just need to make it very clear. We'd like a phased approach. And the argument for a non-phased approach does not take into account that there are no really new uses here of this port. We're extending the uses that are already there, and we're building it on an existing market. So there's no rush to get this done in 5 years because nothing's changing about the market. Nothing's drastically changing about how this port will be used in the next 5 years. So I think you've heard this request over and over. We'd like a phased approach. It's also much less risky from a cost perspective, and it better matches the forms of funding that you're planning on to even get from housing. So I think for many financial reasons, we need a more phased approach here.
Stephen.
Yeah, just jumping on what Carly was saying. Nate, overall, we just keep on getting the same position given to us that we need 7,000 to 9,000 housing units. I think that we've heard through all of the AGs from the task force that we're not in agreement about this. We're not in agreement about that financial model. If Piers 8 and Pier 10 have another 10 years available to them while they're usable, I believe that that was given to us as part of the task force. There's got to be additional grant money or money that can be found during those 10 years to do ultimately what you're trying to do with the marginal pier. I think that this does need to be a phased-in approach. I think that there are opportunities for additional money. The government is looking more at maritime in general, so who knows what's going to open up within those 10 years. But I think that this approach and having us vote on whether or not we want this plan to happen, I don't think that you're going to have the plan. So I think that we need, as task force, we need to be presented with a different plan that we can all agree upon. Otherwise, the votes are not going to go in favor of what we've been presented.
Understood, and I hear you. I would one reaction, Stephen, is we are coming to with money to address the Pier 10 issues, which today we're hearing from Seaboard that the lack of fendering has damaged their ships, and we're addressing that. So we're working and coming with money as a way to address that issue. And then to the point of around maintaining Pier 8, I would just go back to what, not being a port expert, and I know you are, but going to what we have heard from Moffett and Nickel is that the finger piers are not the industry standard. So if we want to be able to maintain a port that can respond to market demands, which I think everybody on this call agrees is what our goal is, that we should be investing long-term to address that issue. So getting towards the marginal pier. What the steps towards that phasing is, it seems like it's coming loudly through this around a phasing approach is something we'll take back and respond to. And I would just say, like, our position is to have a modern port. We need to respond to modern trends, and that gets us to that marginal pier.
The only thing that I would push back on that comment is not all maritime traffic is containerized cargo. And there are different types of vessels that are working in the harbor that could utilize a finger pier. So if we're just looking at containerized cargo, you have to open up you have to broaden that.
Yeah, understood. Yes, and that's one of the things that we've I'll respond to this and just want to make sure I give time for task force members to ask any other questions of the AG. Containerized cargo is the one that generates the most revenue, is what we've heard from Moffett and Nickel. And so we want to be able to provide the space for the containerized traffic so that we can, get to the moves that don't require the subsidy, but then also have enough space to provide for those other uses. And that's what I talked about with the 60 acres, is to get the throughput up with new investment and new efficient stacking, and then provide space for other things that do generate revenue, but not enough to be able to respond to the need. So that's what our planning work is intended to do. Victoria, you had your hand up.
I want to circle back to that question about what the price per square foot is for building housing on this site, including the levels of resiliency and addressing climate issues that will be needed to put any housing since it's in the flood zone. Do you guys have an idea of what the cost will be?
We do. I don't know it off the top of my head now, so rather than giving you something that's incorrect, I want to talk to the team that put that together and then respond in writing to you. I don't want to give you something that's incorrect today.
Okay.
There was a question. Sorry, go ahead. No, go ahead, please.
Also have and with that number, what resiliency things have you factored into that the buildings on the site will have to meet?
Yeah, we do have a cost per square foot for that. Again, I don't know it off the top of my head, so I'll give you what the components of the resiliency strategy are, and then we can provide you with the cost. So there's both elevating and making sure that in the elevation accounts for going to the 2100 level of protection in a 100-year storm. So there's an elevation that's happening. And then there is a series of protections at the building level to meet code. So we're doing both port. There's things that are happening at the edge, basically at the bulkhead line, then there's building level resilience, and then there's the elevation. And the elevation is important because it provides protection for the upland neighborhoods that are not protected today. So we're doing all of those investments, which will get you the cost for to protect the port and protect the buildings and protect the upland area. I just want to answer one question that's been in the chat for quite some time that I haven't answered. And that was about our energy planning. So the question is, if there a projected study or energy or electricity consumption for the new terminal, will any portion of this energy come from sustainable sources, either outsourced or generated within the terminal itself? That's from Adria. Sorry if I mispronounced your name. So we are working right now to with Con Ed to prepare the study about the electricity demand and what the consumption will be. Our expectation is that there will be a whole new series of, in the cost, there's new infrastructure investment to provide electricity to the site, and that we want to be able to provide as much of that through sustainable sources as possible. So we're working with our consultant team, Burrow Happel, to look at the ways in which we could have energy generated on the site right now. We do not have a full plan yet for that, but it's one of the goals that's within the clean maritime port. Amy, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I'm interested in Stephen's comments about the finger pier and other uses. One thing that the Moffett and Nichols report also said was that containerization to barge was a risky business model because truckers, it's cheaper to truck and they have the network, shippers have the networks. So I'm interested in Stephen's comments about the finger piers can be used for other goods and how that might look in this model and why we're not looking at that as a way to phase in, especially since this so-called Blue Highway, which I think we all believe in, but is actually a service road. It's a single node route from BMT up to Hunts Point. So I'm not really getting the build out and the phasing of the Blue Highway, which I think we should take into account as we're looking at the phasing of the operations of this port.
So Amy, I'm not sure if that was directed towards me, but I'm happy to connect with you after this call so that we don't take up more time talking through that.
That's a great answer. Thank you, Stephen.
You're welcome, Amy.
Courtney, if I might, or Farhana, if I might use moderator's privilege a little here, since we've heard from you guys a number of times, if there's others who haven't spoken, who might want to offer anything we've got 7 minutes left, and I want to make sure we have enough space for others who haven't shared, either in the chat. Again, we're taking notes and we'll share responses to that. So if you prefer to share in the chat, that'd be great. Or if you wanted to, for task force members to ask any of the AGs anything, but for others who haven't spoken. We'll run this like a Quaker meeting. I jest. Okay, Farhana, you had your hand raised. Please, I'll go back to you.
Oh, I just had one last quick question, is if Moffett and Nichols included all of the resiliency retrofits and features in the 60-acre projection?
That broke up for me. I didn't hear the beginning, Courtney. Could you repeat that?
Yeah, just if Moffett and Nichols had included all of the resiliency retrofits, features, and improvements that you mentioned in the 60-acre estimate for the total amount of space that's needed.
Yes, that the site planning and the cost estimate reflect the resiliency infrastructure investment.
And the number of acres as well.
Yes.
The 60 acres. Okay.
Yes. Amy, you had your hand raised.
Sorry, that's from before.
Does a task force member have a question to any of the advisory group members? We want to make sure that you have an opportunity to hear from them.
I guess the outstanding question for me is around things like environmental justice. Have you guys had a chance to talk about that? Whether it is regarding the the COCPA, or if it is regarding other forms of environmental justice, quotas or benefits relating to any of these resiliency efforts and things. Just curious if you've been able to have that conversation.
I'll just say, no, we haven't had those conversations. We've been mostly focused on other things. It would be great to create space just to talk about those specific things though with this group. Yeah, yes, I know it's shocking, Amy.
Well, I want to acknowledge that those questions have been on the table for WXY and EDC for many, many months. And so I do think it is of that group's, responsibility to respond to those and make the space for them and ensure that they are part of this project as has been outlined in your materials from the beginning.
Understood. So any other questions? Okay, well, I appreciate the time on a Monday. Really appreciate it, and especially to the advisory groups and the task force members. Thank you for taking the time, and we know we ask a lot, so we appreciate it. We are going to, as again, we'll respond to all of the questions that we received today, both verbally as well as in the chat, and then distribute that to the advisory group so that we make sure everybody has the same information. So thanks, everybody.
Is there going to be another advisory group meeting?
Yes, we're going to have another one. EDC team, do you recall when that will be?
We have to reschedule it. That was for the all hands next week, so we'll send out a new time.
But there's not going to be another just our group advisory group meeting.
That's correct. We'll have we'll revising the schedule a bit and share that out.
Okay, because I think Carly brings up a valid point, is that we haven't talked about some things that are under our purview that need to be, and we haven't had time to do that.
Yeah, understood. Yeah, let us talk internally about that, because that's a key point and one that we have been thinking a lot about, and understand that that's part of the name of this group. So we want to make sure we respond to it effectively. All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day. Have a good week.
Thank you.